We can get started. Um, um, Greetings, everyone. My name is Jeff Balls. I'm president of the Oregon Marsh Bird Club. Tonight, we are going to have a presentation on the Finch Research Network. This is kind of a brainchild of ours. We had Matt Young last year, and with some exciting news on some I believe it was Red Cross bills and the like. And he says, "Oh, we're just getting this Finch Research Network kicked off. I've got colleagues around the planet basically, and I'm anxious to bring some of them on board." And so it just happened to work out for us. We basically booked a year ahead with Matt, and we decided January, cold, miserable, probably looking for a little warmth. Yeah, some honey creepers, Hawaiian honey creepers might be a good relief from winter a little bit. So we're happy to have you here. So I'm going to read your bio. Nathan Goldberg is a graduate of Cornell University and a tour leader and guide for Red Hill birding. He's been an avid birder for over a decade and is from the Chicagoland region. In 2020, he set the Illinois Big Year record, seeing 341 species over the course of the year. After guiding a private trip throughout the Hawaiian Islands in 2021, he reached out to Matt Young and the Finch Research Network to get involved in helping raise awareness around the conservation crisis facing Hawaiian honey creepers. His focus and involvement with FiRN centers on engagement and information gathering and regarding conservation efforts in the native Hawaiian honey creepers. And Matt Young is the president and founder of the Finch Research Network. He's lived in central New York for 26 years. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Nathan. Nathan's going to present us tonight. And let's all welcome Nathan.
Great. Well, thank you all for joining us today. This is going to actually be sort of a tag team presentation between myself and Matt. But as Jeff shared, I sort of am, as you can see on this title slide, the Hawaiian Honey Creeper Project lead for the Finch Research Network. Essentially, that means that Matt and I talk a lot about finches, but it surrounds, when we're talking specifically, honey creepers. Matt's expertise extends far beyond honey creepers, though, into a number of other finch species, including red crossbills, evening grosbeaks, and more. So without further ado, we're going to kick it off, and I'm actually going to hand it to Matt to start and share a little bit about FiRN and what the Finch Research Network does, sort of from a high-level perspective, and then we'll get into the details regarding Hawaiian honey creepers and the conservation crisis the islands are facing.
Can I drive right now? You're going to drive for me, right?
I'll drive. Yeah, and I guess, you know what? We'll start very briefly just with the overview of the talk. As I mentioned, the beginning is going to be about FiRN, but then we're going to get into the nitty-gritty about the Hawaiian Islands, starting with island formation, the Hawaiian avifauna and their evolution, then shifting over to the island-by-island breakdown of the finches, as well as conservation initiatives being undertaken to preserve them and save them essentially from extinction. And then the end, we're going to share with you a couple ways that you can help in the tools for conservation that are being employed. But anyways, Matt, take it away.
Cool. Yeah, thanks, Nathan. It's an honor. It's always an honor to talk to people about the Finch Research Network. And it's great to have Nathan on board here to be a project lead here. I've said some of this in my conversation or my talk presentation last year. My whole life kind of shifted after I finished my undergraduate degree in Oneana and hydrogeology, meteorology. I then took a job in Yellowstone. I drove cross country. And I had a flock of crossbills land along the banks of the Yellowstone River the first day I was in Yellowstone. And my whole life and worldview shifted. Now, I didn't know it at that time, obviously, that it was going to shift quite the way it has. But in 2020, the beginning days of COVID, after many years of identifying crossbill call type recordings that people would send me from around the continent and the world, a bunch of us decided to launch the Finch Research Network in coordination with the Finch forecast, the winter Finch forecast that Ron Pittaway put out for many years. And so, we started this thing, and the idea was, why we landed on network, not initiative, not institute, was we wanted this to be something that everybody could get involved in. It's dedicated to study conservation finches habitats globally. If you're a finch enthusiast, an artist, a writer, a citizen science, a sound recordist, everybody can be kind of part of this. And we kind of owe the many years or decades of the growing of the kind of the finch fans over the years to Ian Newton in the UK, who wrote Finches, the book Finches, in 1973. Ian worked with Ron Pittaway actually in Ontario. A lot of people don't realize this, on snow geese, but he was here he came over here to work to kind of get some insight from Ron at the time, unbeknownst to Ron, on finches here in North America. And then the book came out like a year or two later. So we kind of made them emeritus status. Ron unfortunately passed away back here in August, I believe it was. Oops. So again, like I said, everybody can kind of get involved from just basic observations, expertise. We're always looking for writers. We're always looking for people to get involved in this. I could not have predicted it would go as well as it have. I've had a lot of people really, really want to get involved and bring in, Tyler Orr, the Finch forecaster, the new one that took over for Ron in 2000, was also a very fortuitous thing. And then we had the super flight, the Finch super flight in 2020 next. I talk to Lillian about this all the time. We got a book coming out in the fall. I'll talk a little bit about that at the very end. But we kind of evolved. By the way. What's that?
Lillian Stokes, just for clarification.
Yes, Lillian Stokes. Just as we talk about all things Finch. So the direction of where we're heading in. We have research and education. Winter Finch forecast going to continue for hopefully many, many, many more years. We have red crossbill and evening grosbeak projects, and there's a lot of different kind of pieces of those projects. But I'll talk a little bit. One of those is we have the Winter Finch Forecast iNaturalist project, so people can actually become part of the Winter Finch, food assessment citizen science team. There's a iNaturalist project. You can go in there and start to assess food crops. So when we make our prediction in the fall, people can help with that. Now we also have a red crossbill and evening grosbeak foraging project that's in iNaturalist. The big projects, though, from a conservation perspective, I'm actually right now in West Virginia at the National Conservation Training Center in West Virginia for a Road to Recovery conference, talking about the 5 Road to Recovery species, one of them being evening grosbeaks. And then tonight, obviously, conservation crisis, Hawaiian honeycreepers. And, different than some, research focused organizations, we're big believers that, let's face it, we all like our backyard feeders for the most part. A big cohort of individuals and diversity that we see at the backyard bird feeders are finches. And there's just more and more studies coming out that the more we observe, and engage with nature, the better we feel about life. There's just study after study coming out. So we're in a process with several actually contemplating like an actual campaign of wellness for finches, wellness for you. There's a lot of dynamics that go into that. Believe it or not, there are finches also tend to be because of their flocking nature and social nature, they can be susceptible to disease at feeders or collisions at windows. They are high on the list for that. So, we're talking about kind of this wellness program around finches. Let's take care of the finches. You'll be able to see them for many years, and it's a nice positive feedback loop for everybody. So yeah, the winter finch forecast, was started by Ron in 1999. He actually had started a little bit before that. I talked a little bit about that already, but the format kind of evolved in 2003. I started doing cross bills for Ron. His enthusiasm became infectious. I mean, he's just, it was a loss for all of us. Finchophiles, I always say, or loxiophiles for cross bills. It was a loss to lose Ron back in August. We really look forward. While Canada always, kind of originated in Ontario, but it's really become much more. A lot of people here in the States, the northern tier states, absolutely have grown to like can't wait for this thing to come out in the fall. And like I said, Ron asked me to do cross bills, part of that forecast, in 2010. Tyler Orr now is the Finch forecaster. He's also on the board of directors for the Finch Research Network. So yeah, we have almost 100 people across the boreal forest and the northern tier states that actually give us data now, do assessments on food crops. Again, we've made this more accessible for everybody. You can actually go and enter this into an iNaturalist project. If you go into iNaturalist, you just type in winter finch food assessment, and it should pop up as a project. And you can actually go out and take photos. There's some methods there, and you can actually get into ranking food crops for various species that finches kind of key into. Red Crossbill is kind of like, the Red Crossbill project was really the genesis of the Finch Research Network. For years, Tim Spar and I had been, identifying crossbill recordings that had been sent to us. We're now, Tim's not quite there, but I've probably listened somewhere close to 20,000 recordings of red crossbills now. It's kind of amazing, this call type phenomenon. And there's actually the spectrograms of the various call types. So that was kind of the genesis of the whole launching of the Finch Research Network. But we've grown pretty fast in just, 3 years, really, just over 3 years we've been around now. And like I said, the Evening Grosbeak Road Recovery Project has kind of become our main conservation project. 92% decline since 1970. It's a species of special concern. In Canada, we have a working group, an international working group that me and David Yaney, who's here with me in West Virginia, heading up our part of the working group. We co-lead this group, and we have these focal groups that are looking at like habitat change, spruce budworm dynamics, collisions from roads, because they like the salt on the roads. They like to go down to the roads and get salt, disease, and also, what climate change is going to have an impact on all of our species to some degree. How will they respond to that? So this is just a little graph of, we were able to secure, again, David Yenny's with the Western Pennsylvania Conservancy. It's also a collaborative with them, with Powder Mill Avian Research Center in Pennsylvania, the Carnegie Museum, and the Finch Research Network. We have this collaborative project. We secured some funds from the Knobloch Foundation, and we actually started satellite tagging birds 2 years ago in Maine. And we now have 46 satellite tags on birds in Maine, Pennsylvania, New York, and Minnesota. Now you don't have a long longevity with these satellite tags. We did have a bird though that gave us almost 2 years of data. I think it was over. We have, let me see here, about. Well, shoot, it's a little late in the day, but this one particular bird, we banded in Maine, very northern Maine, where the feeder cam is. We have a finch feeder cam up in Woodland, Maine, that Bill Sheehan kind of maintains for the Finch Research Network, has given us like 25% of our total satellite points. We also have nano tags, which are the Modus Tower tags. This is just kind of the chart. We're actually hoping to actually go out west here either this winter or next winter to start to tag some populations out there. There's 5 different cult type populations in North America and subspecies of evening grosbeak. A lot of people don't realize this. So this project continues. It will continue for a while, hopefully, you know, for decades or a decade at least. And hopefully we'll be able to bring this back, you know, figure out reasons why this species has declined, and we'll be able to help it come back in numbers again. And like I said, the wellness aspect, you know, this was just one study in the UK that kind of really got the ball rolling. There's literally dozens of studies that are coming out that are linking engagement with nature to improve the well-being and mental health. And you know, finches play a big role in that, especially for people that are more of the, you know, let's look, you know, get your cup of coffee, look out your window, you know, and you got a flock of house finches or siskins or red poles or goldfinches, or whether it's out west, you got rosy finches. Again, it can be really uplifting. So I think the more we care about these species, the more there's this positive feedback loop that's very important to us. I mean, we have Holly Merker, who wrote the book Ornithotherapy. I don't know if everybody's heard of that book. She's on the board of directors now at the Finch Research Network too, and we're working with the Wild Bird Feeding Institute to try to, you know, come up with a study around, you know, finches and feeders and feeder distance from windows. We're hoping to look at more of this stuff to get a better handle and hopefully more education around these topics. And now, you know, to tonight's main star, it's you know, it's an honor that Nathan reached out to me. He actually ran into you know, we have a mutual, well, it wasn't, he didn't know Bob McGuire at the time, right? Back in,
Not well.
Did you know him? Not well, yeah.
Not well.
You probably knew his name at least, because Nathan went to Cornell. I was, you know, worked for many years at the Cornell Lab of Ornithology. You know, I did a lot of the editing of sounds of the Merlin app, but, you know, he reached out to me. Bob actually said, hey, I think you're going to hear from Nathan. He was just in Hawaii. I ran into him. I did dinner. He just was like, you know, he wants to do something about the conservation issue going on there, the conservation crisis. So we immediately started talking, and here we are tonight. And I'll hand it over to you now, because he's, you know, he's more of the expert. He's actually been in the field and seen many of these species. So, hey, Nathan, take it over.
Wonderful. Well, thanks for all that, Matt. It's really nice to hear sort of all the history of FiRN and all the work you guys are doing, aside from work with honey creepers. But yeah, I think we're all sort of eager to learn about honey creepers. So without further ado, I'd like to share with you a lot about them. And so the first thing I'd like to share is that we call them Hawaiian honey creepers, but they are actually a finch. And so we'll discuss how that really unfolded in the coming slides. But just as a high-level perspective, on the left, we have the bird called a common rose finch, which is a well-distributed finch throughout Europe and Asia. And the theory is that they colonized the Hawaiian Islands and then basically diversified into a rapid and wide array of species, filling every ecological niche available on the island chain, I should say. And on the right is a print that you can see highlighting all the different individuals that ended up diversifying from a Carpodacus finch, which is the genus of finches that common rose finch is a part of. So we don't exactly know if it was a common rose finch, but it was it or a very close relative. I will be sharing with you more details as to what all these birds on the right are. But as you can see, there's a common ancestor in the center, as that gray head, and then everything around it are the Hawaiian finches that diversified from that finch species. So crazy rapid diversification and an impressive radiation. So as I mentioned, obviously, these birds somehow made it to the Hawaiian archipelago. It appears that due to genetic analysis, we've learned that these birds arrived roughly 4 million years ago, likely from Asia. And they look just like this image, probably a large flock, dropped in on these islands, likely getting caught by storms or a vagrant potential that we don't entirely understand. Perhaps they rode flotsam part of the way, but needless to say, enough individuals made it to the Hawaiian Islands to then begin speciating, and they never left. So I think it's important that we all learn how the Hawaiian Islands even came into existence. So the plate tectonics of the world really played a role in Hawaii's formation. And it's actually part of this Hawaii Emperor Seamount chain. As you can see in the image on the upper left, there is this big right angle almost, I guess it's a slightly obtuse angle of seamount / islands that were formed, and they go all the way up to the Aleutian chain in Alaska. Essentially what happened is the Pacific plate moved over a hot spot within the Earth's, I believe it would be the mantle, and that hot spot every now and then would poke a hole in the plate, and then magma would shoot up and create these islands. But what you'll see is obviously this is a chain of islands, and what happened is as the plate moves over that hot spot, different points make it through the mantle, different points of magma make it through, and then as the plate moves over that plume, it shuts off the feed of magma, and then eventually it has. Oh, as you'll see in the bottom right image, essentially the plate is moving at roughly 51 kilometers per million years, which I don't know, that seems like a very long time, not a lot of movement, but this took over between 40 almost and 85 million years to form. And when we're talking in time, it's important for perspective. So the most of these seamounts are underwater, but you do have occasional islands that formed. So if you think about the island of Midway Atoll, that was part of the seamount's creation of the archipelago. I guess I should say the archipelago's formation of the seamount. I'm still not sure I'm saying that back in the right order, but needless to say, the point I want to make here is the island chain is older as you go further to the left and to the north. So I guess it would be west and north. That is the oldest point of the seamount chain, and the furthest to the south and the east is the newest. And so this all pans out when you look at the ages of the islands. For example, Kauai is the furthest west of the Hawaiian island chain of the major islands that we're going to be discussing today. It's nearly 5.5 million years old. The big island of what is known as Hawaii Island is not even 1 million years old. And when you go to Hawaii Island, which is also referred to as the Big Island, that island is covered in magma. There's active volcanoes that are still going on. Mauna Loa and Kilauea are both still active. And actually, currently, a new island is being formed as we speak, known as Loihi. And that is still underwater. Eventually, it will be surfacing, ideally through the ocean. And then that will be a new island, part of the Hawaiian island chain. So here's another version of that same discussion that we just had. There's a core 4 islands that are referred to as Hawaii and the state of Hawaii. It includes the Big Island, Maui, Kauai, and Oahu. But the archipelago itself totals 137 islands. So the oldest member of this chain is Kur, which formed almost 30 million years ago. And you'll notice it's far on the left of the upper right graphic. And on the far bottom right corner of that graphic, you'll see the Big Island of Hawaii and the chain that we all find familiar. And you'll see in the left graphic, there are various islands that have surfaced, but the seamount itself still is forming, or it has formed a number of islands that never made it actually into island status, right? They never poked through the ocean. So they just exist underwater as big mounds of molten, or I guess dried magma that is no longer molten because, the water extinguished it and it's now just rock. So when we think about the Hawaiian island chain, I think it's important to have perspective also as to really the distance it has from anything nearby it. The nearest neighbor to Hawaii is actually Alaska, which is almost 2,300 miles away, just a little under. California, it's not any closer. It's 2,282 miles from California, and Alaska is only about 20, maybe 30 miles closer to Hawaii. But when we think also its proximity to Asia, I guess proximity is the wrong word to use. It's 3,800 miles to Japan, 5,700 miles to Australia, 5,700 miles to South America, and as mentioned before, 2,200 miles plus to the United States mainland. That classifies Hawaii as one of the most isolated archipelagos in the world. And yet what's incredible is that over time, birds still managed to find the islands. And not only did they find them, but they flourished when they found them. So historically, it's important to remember, Hawaii didn't always look like the land of resorts and hotels. It was a tropical paradise 100% of the way. The dreams that we have of tropical islands and paradises, Hawaii was it. And you'll see here, this is there's a cave on, I think this one's Maui, or perhaps this is the big, I'll bury the details. It's a cave on one of the islands. This is a location you can still visit, and they know that every bird in this image used to exist at that cave, because what happened was essentially birds fell into that water over millions of years, got caught in it, died, and then sank to the bottom. The cave itself ended up filling up with dirt and sediment. And now researchers have gone in and found fossil remains of a number of species that have gone extinct since. So extinctions happened in multiple waves on the Hawaiian Islands. There were the extinctions that happened before Western colonization took place. Captain Cook's arrival was in 1778. Pre-1778, there were a number of things that went extinct due to the Polynesians first finding the islands in the early thousands of the last millennia. There were birds known as the stumbling moanalo goose from Maui, the Kauai mole duck, which we believe to have been a blind, flightless duck that wandered around the island and would forage like a kiwi almost. Additionally, the Kauai stilt owl existed, and it was in this image you can see it's chasing wahi grosbeaks and the Kauai o'o, all of which are extinct. So there was a huge diversity in birds that formed over millions and millions of years. I guess that you can use the island's age to inform you as to why more of these birds were found on Kauai and not on the Big Island. Kauai's been around for almost 5.5 million years, and the Big Island is less than 1 million years old. So evolution does take time. So there's this wonderful graphic that I found of the Hawaiian goose, right? On the far right, you have the bird known as the nene, a conservation success story, actually. And that bird is about the size of a Canada goose. So this is a true to size graphic that gives you an idea of the diversity in Hawaiian geese that existed pre-1778 that have all been found and ground truthed through subfossil remains. And there were some sheerly incredible birds that were found on the islands that in some cases, like these goose, and the second from the left is known as the Kauai turtle-jawed goose, and it truly walked around and ate plants like tortoises do. And so there are efforts on the islands to essentially bring the goose in new form back to the ecosystem by releasing tortoises in their place. We now will move to the age of modern extinction, though. It's a very sad story. And in this context, I like to highlight the birds known as o'os, an entire family of birds that after colonization essentially ended up going extinct. The last o'o that survived was on Kauai, known as the Kauai o'o. And I will point out there were 4 species of o'os, 1 for each island. Hawaii o'o was the last o'o to go extinct. It went extinct in, I believe, 1972. There's a video of it actually singing, and it's a very depressing video because obviously it is the last of its kind, singing for a mate that will never respond. There is discussion as to what caused the decline of the o'os. Hawaiian Islands were known to have wonderful bird feather capes and helmets that were used by Hawaiian royalty. These capes are sometimes 2 meters wide, 6 feet plus, can be very, very elaborate. And as you can see in the cape in the center upper image, those are all bird feathers, and all of those yellow feathers came from those yellow feathers on the o'os. And the o'o is only about maybe 8 inches long. It was not an all yellow bird, so you can only imagine the density of these birds on the islands. The red feathers came from a very famous Hawaiian bird that we'll talk about later called the iiwi. And there are less red in that cape, but there's numbers of capes that are covered in red feathers. And anytime you see black feathers on the capes, it's from extinct birds because there are no black feathered native Hawaiian birds left in existence anymore. But I will point out the o'os did not go extinct due to feather collection by local residents of the islands pre-1778. They went extinct for a different reason. We will talk about that shortly, but I will give you the quick answer. They went extinct due to avian malaria, not due to feather collection. Certainly, feather collection was a heavy weight on the species and their numbers, but it was not what caused their extinction. So we don't have to point fingers at the native Hawaiian community and population. They are not the cause. So when we think about the Hawaiian Islands, though, it's important for context. Where did all these birds come from and how did they get there? So we've done genetic analysis. On the left, you have an o'o and another bird below it known as the Kioea. They're both extinct. They were thought originally to be Australasian honey eaters, which they look very similar to, and certainly they forage like, but they're actually not. They're related to waxwings. And what's fascinating to me is that Bohemian waxwing actually was found on the Hawaiian Islands last year. There were multiple birds that showed up, a true vagrant, and yet we ask ourselves, how did the waxwings get there? They flew, and they, at one point or another, millions of years ago, a flock of waxwings likely showed up on the islands, never left, and gave us the o'os and the Kioea. Very fascinating story. We also have thrushes on the island. The 2 photos on the right, I actually took while on the islands. The bird on the right, the puaiohi, is found on Kauai. The bird on the left image is the oma'o found on the Big Island. But we've also lost thrushes too. The kama'o, the amui, and the oloma'o all were found on Oahu as well as Kauai. They've gone extinct. They're all solitaires. So when you think Townsend solitaire, that's what these birds are. And one example of seeing that really act out was I saw an oma'o, which is normally what I think of as a ground-dwelling thrush, perform a sky flight mating display like a solitaire does from one tree to another, almost 50 feet in the air. And it did a whole display, and it just was, I just sat there going, oh my God, they are solitaires. They really do have that in their genetics. We also have the very infamous elapaios on the left. This one's the Kauai elapaio. There's numbers of species on all 4 islands, but the closest relative to them are monarch flycatchers, which came from the tropical Pacific region. The Cook Islands, Rarotonga monarch is actually the elapaios' closest relative, and you can very easily see that they look quite similar. So now we've just highlighted so far 3 birds, waxwings that came from the Americas, as well as solitaires, and now you've got birds coming from the tropical Pacific Islands, also all converging on the Hawaiian Islands. Additionally, there were corvids, crows or ravens. The alala on the right is the only member of that family left on the Hawaiian Islands. It's functionally extinct and is extinct in the wild, although Matt just alerted me that a few days ago, the federal government approved release of alala back on the islands for a reintroduction campaign. What blows my mind about the alala is that its closest relative is not American crow or common raven, but it's actually rook, which is a Eurasian corvid. And you can kind of see the similarities. There used to be crows or corvids on all the islands. Unfortunately, now we found ourselves in a very sad state where they are no longer present. But hopefully this reintroduction effort will be successful. Time will tell. But we're here to talk about finches, so let's get into it. Again, as I showed both of these graphics before, a flock of finches, arrived on the islands from likely Asia and populated the islands and diversified like crazy. They ended up finding a variety of niches on the islands, and they all diversified in different manners to solve different tasks. You've got the nectivorous birds on the left, and the center probing birds that feed mainly on insects, and then the crushing birds that eat seeds. And that included grosbeaks. There's a wonderful extinct one known as the King Kong grosbeak. Its bill was just so massive. I think that was the desire to name it that. It's just truly encapsulated this out of this world bill and used it to just crush seeds all over the forests. And the subfossil remains of that bill it's a monstrous bird, monstrous bill, I guess in context for the size of a grosbeak. So what are the seed crushers eating? Well, these are photos taken by me of native plants that I found on the islands in some of my travels. First off, you've got mamane, which is a wonderful flowering plant on the right that then produces seed pods on the left. That is the favored food of one of the Big Island's endemic species that we'll highlight that is still alive. It's the only member left of the seed-eating Hawaiian honeycreepers / finches, known as the palila. And we'll talk about the palila later in this presentation. Additionally, we've got the nectivorous birds that feed, besides on mamane flowers, but mainly on this ohia lehua, which is a beautiful flowering tree, actually, that all the honeycreepers just thrive on when it's in bloom. And there are so many of these trees in the native forests that they never are without food. They're just hopping from tree to tree and just roaming the forest until they find the food. We also have got insectivorous birds, right? They are feeding mainly on these koa trees, which is a very solid wood. And these forests are so lush that these trees actually have lichen and mosses growing all over their branches. But in that moss, they will find actually that there are bugs crawling all over. Sometimes there's bugs that bore into the tree branches themselves, and there are birds that have figured out how to eat those as well. And so reforestation efforts on the Big Island really is contributing to the conservation success of certain species, specifically insectivorous birds, because without koa trees, they have no food. Sadly, though, we've lost a lot. We've lost a lot of birds. Of this radiation of Hawaiian honeycreepers that came from the finch family, they are all finches. Any finch you see from this point forward, any bird you see from this point forward is a finch, which is, of course, the reason the Finch Research Network has gotten involved with this conservation crisis. But we've lost a lot, right? We had over 50 species within the Hawaiian honeycreeper radiation. Only 17 of them exist still, and many of those have gone extinct within the last 50 years. I've put, unfortunately, X's across the faces of the birds on the left that were the representatives of their genus. We've lost a large variety of them, and some very wonderful ones. In the center of your screen are 3 representatives of different branches of the tree that I found just utterly fascinating. The Ula I Havane on the center bottom is just an incredibly patterned bird that made no sense. It reminds me most of a wall creeper from Europe. It's a color pattern that we really don't tend to see a lot in nature, and it just was remarkable. The greater Akialoa, that bill is almost as long as that bird's body, and what we think is it actually would walk around the branches of trees almost like a nuthatch and use that bill to probe into the mosses to try to find insects. They'd also walk around the ground and forage in the foliage. And then obviously you've got the Kona grosbeak there on the right with just a monstrous bill, really primed for seed crushing, but unfortunately we've lost them too. So invasives do dominate the landscape. On my trip to Hawaii, I believe it was actually in 2022, I encountered 2 of the very prominent invasives, the Polynesian rat, which I took that photo in primary forest on Kauai. So that animal has made it into every nook and cranny of the island. And then on the right, the small Indian mongoose, which is definitely a known predator of seabirds on the islands. They dominate the landscape, yes, but they are not the crucial problem. The biggest issue facing Hawaiian honeycreepers, hands down, is mosquitoes. Avian malaria is the #1 killer of the Hawaiian honeycreepers and finches that exists. And it is a travesty as to the amount of damage this individual species has done to the radiation of Hawaiian honeycreepers. All it takes is one bite from a mosquito infected with avian malaria, and that bird will be dead within days. On the right, you see the Maui parrotbill, also known as the kiwi-kiu. That bird was in the prime of its life. You can see it had bands on its legs. It's an adult. It was a breeder for sure. That bird got hit by a mosquito, or excuse me, bit by a mosquito, and that was it. End of its life.
A non-native mosquito, by the way.
Yes,
Just to let
non-native
everybody-
mosquito, by the way. So these mosquitoes were brought there by the Europeans during colonization, and it was an accident, and yet they've just essentially wiped everything out in a matter of decades, if not a few centuries. So why is this happening? So here's a graphic that I really enjoy, even though it's so sad. And it represents what's known as the mosquito zone. Essentially, if you think of the Hawaiian Islands as mountains, right? The top of that mountain's higher elevation than the bottom, and mosquitoes can only live up to certain elevations. Unfortunately, every year with climate change, that mosquito zone line is moving up on the island, and mosquitoes are now finding their ways into every nook and cranny of an island, when originally they were sort of restricted to lower elevations, and the birds in the higher elevations were able to survive. So what happened here is, in recent years, Kauai and Oahu, the mosquito line has topped the highest elevational point of the island. So mosquitoes can now live any and everywhere on these islands without worrying about dying due to elevational gradients. Maui now only has a few hundred meters left of safe habitat, which is very sad because there's some birds that truly will not move higher into native habitat, even though it exists, due to their own ecological restrictions. And if they go down anywhere, they go and die because mosquitoes live further down slope. So the only good news here is that the Big Island, because it is so tall compared to the other islands, it hasn't had the age of erosion hasn't taken place, and it's still quite young. It still has a lot of habitat that is native, in good shape, and with no mosquitoes. And so there are still plenty of endemic birds there that are facing other problems, but not as severe as the mosquito. So I think it's important that now we share where these birds live and where we can find them, and what species we're really talking about, and what conservation issues really they're facing. They live obviously in Hawaii, but today we're going to start our journey at the oldest island of the main archipelago, Kauai, on the far left. Its native habitat is all in green. I've put 4 of these graphics in this presentation for each island. A good rule of thumb here is that anything pink or red is non-native habitat, and it's degraded and no longer can sustain birds, at least easily, and not many native birds. Any birds you've seen at lower elevations in the Hawaiian Islands, 90% of them are going to be exotics that have just come out of pet trades or other releases, but they are not the native species that we're focusing on today. All the native species are really restricted now to high elevation, and all the high elevation you're going to see in these graphics is the green area. So it's this montane wet habitat, and the arrow in this case is pointing to the Alakai Swamp, which essentially is the last stronghold for native birds on Kauai. This is a photo that I took right next to the swamp area of the coast. It's known as the Nepali coast. It's a very famous tourist destination. People take boat trips along the edge of it. This is essentially on top of all the ridges. So it's a beautiful, beautiful tropical environment. And this is the Alakai Swamp itself. Not so much a swamp as it is truly just a dense, lush, moist forest. I call it a cloud forest. You may be able to call it a rainforest too, just due to the density of rain they get per year. But as you can see, it is a lush environment covered in green. All the tree trunks are covered in mosses and lichens. The ground is squishy because of all the mosses on it. It's an incredible experience to get to be in a native Hawaiian forest. It's just very sad to know that that forest is so restricted to high elevations, and that many tourists don't even get to experience it or see it. The biggest sad story of our recent last couple years is the Aki Kiki. This is my photo of one from 2 years ago. At the time I took this photo, there were about 6 left in the wild. I saw a video actually posted 2 days ago, taken by a researcher on Kauai, of what he believes to be the last wild individual of that species. There are about 110 in captivity, but this bird is essentially extinct, and this is it. It's over. It's no different than what happened to the California condor, and how we all think about California condor now, in the sense that they've been released. You can still go see them, but there was a period of time where the last ones were taken out of the wild, and there were no more condors flying anywhere for a period of time. So this, I would argue, is the most prolific extinction speaker, I guess, if you will, right? It doesn't speak for itself, but it is the bird that we use as a vessel to communicate the problems facing the Hawaiian Islands. And it's a really fascinating bird. It crawls on the branches, it's insectivorous, it's poking and grabbing bugs off the lichens and the mosses, and it walks around the trees like a nuthatch. It's a fascinating bird. It's not the only bird on Kauai that's struggling, though. Here we have the akeke'e, also known as the Kauai akepa. There's only about 635 of them estimated in the wild still. It's quite vulnerable. They do not breed well in captivity. Very little is known about how this bird behaves. On the left is my photo of one that I saw moments after we saw the Akikiki. Truly remarkable experience. And the bird on the right, obviously, is a much better photo to share with you what the bird actually looks like. It captured my interest when I saw it, even though at the beginning I kind of thought it was just another yellow honey creeper. Very charismatic and fascinating to see. And then you have the aniani owl. They're decreasing. Many researchers seem to believe that this is going to be the next extinction candidate on Kauai. They're plummeting in numbers. We don't quite have a grasp on how many are doing all right. It's considered stable. I doubt that's going to last. But this is a bird you can actually still see from publicly accessible parking lots and roads up near the Alakai Swamp, which is there's a park there called Koke'e State Park that offers wonderful views of a number of things, including Waimea Canyon, if anyone's been to Kauai. What are we doing to fix the issues facing the Kauai birds? Well, there's a team working on the ground as we speak. They're the Kauai Forest Bird Recovery Project. They're doing a number of things, but many of which are surrounding protection of their habitats and specifically conservation of the birds. The photo on the top right is a photo of actually an Akikiki baby in captivity. It's one of their captive rearing facilities, but they also are doing field surveys and mist netting for birds to see how they're faring, and probably take blood samples to see if they're infected with any parasites, as well as doing public outreach so that people actually understand what's going on the island. So we'll shift now to Oahu. That was Kauai and the birds there. Oahu is a quick one because the native habitat is fairly restricted. You'll notice there's no arrows, largely because the native forest is lush and great, but there are only extinct honey creepers minus the Oahu amakihi, which is a lovely example of evolution working at rapid paces. Somehow this bird's family figured it out, genus figured it out, and they're resistant to avian malaria. So genetically, something worked, and they are doing quite well. There's not a big conservation issue surrounding this individual. There is an elapaio, one of those little monarch flycatchers that lives on Oahu, that is struggling quite a bit, largely due to habitat issues and presumably avian malaria as well. But the finches that were on Oahu are no longer there, so we don't really have a conservation focused organization putting in a lot of work for honey creepers and on Oahu, and that's a sad story. We're going to shift now to Maui, though, another island with some of the most severely endangered birds on the Hawaiian Islands. The native habitat on Maui is restricted largely to the lee slope on the eastern side of the island. That's where all the conservation work is really happening. And an arrow here is pointing to Waikamoi Preserve, which is just below the lovely Haleakala National Park, a beautiful park well above tree line, moonscape galore. But in its foothills / slopes, once you hit tree line, you get into beautiful, beautiful, lush tropical forest. And this is where the Waikamoi Preserve is. And this is where people are still able to see, if they're very lucky, the last two of the remaining highly endangered Hawaiian honey creepers from Maui. And I will point out, I've been using honey creeper and finch interchangeably. They are finches, but they're sort of referred to as Hawaiian honey creepers, but it's the same thing. Anyways, before we get to the two most pressing birds on Maui, there is a third. It's the alawahio. It's a lovely little bird that forages on the ground it's also known as Maui creeper. And it's stable. It's vulnerable due to, of course, habitat degradation. I'm sure avian malaria is not doing well for it, but for some reason it seems to be doing better than the other birds. The ones we're here to really share with you today, though, is the kiwi or Maui parrotbill. My photo actually of one that I saw in 2014 is on the left, back when there were almost 800 of them. And since then, in about 10 years, we're down to only 135. Rapid decline of this species. Again, all due to avian malaria. On the right, obviously, is a slightly better photo, but I always like to include the ones I was able to capture. And then the other bird, I argue the most charismatic, wonderful Hawaiian honey creeper, the akohe. There's 1,650 of them left. Rapid decline, a bird that is in just sheer free fall. My photo again from the 2014 trip I took on the left, and a much better one by Jack Jeffrey, a conservationist from the islands, on the right. This bird just has so much charisma. You can understand why it's a nectivorous bird and how evolution worked in its favor, in the sense that it's got this crest in front of, at the base of its bill, that allows it to pollinate flowers while it's drinking from them. It's no different than a hummingbird, except it's not fluttering with rapid wing beats. It's just hopping through the trees, drinking nectar from plants. It's a big bird too. It's about 8 inches long, so it's quite sizable. I can't tell you enough about how much I love this bird. It's just so fascinating and so wild looking. Maui Forest Bird Recovery Project, very similar name, very different island, is working to protect the Maui birds. And this is an organization that the Finch Research Network has worked very closely with in the last couple of years. And we've donated some funds to them directly to see if they can help the honey creepers on the island. They do some reforestation work actually as well on the island. But again, public outreach, and there is a captive breeding program for the Maui birds as well. So in that photo is a Maui parrotbill. We're going to shift to our final big island, though, no pun intended, the Big Island, also known as the island of Hawaii. This island is the newest island. It's the tallest island, and it has a number of areas that are still protected and at least still intact for birds. And so there's a slightly better story surrounding a few of the birds on the Big Island, and then a very sad story coming up as well. The arrow on the right is pointing to Hakalau National Wildlife Refuge, a wonderful place that many birders visit when they're visiting the Big Island to see honey creepers. On the left, you see the arrow pointing to where is the area known as the Palila Discovery Trail. Very different environment, this dry forest for that one member of that grosbeak radiation. Here's Hakalau, though, a wonderful native forest that actually is reforested. And I'll show you a photo very shortly of what it used to look like. But this is, in 40 years, They took basically a barren mountain edge and slope and reforested it, and now you have these mature trees covered in lichens, covered in mosses, with lots of native birds. So this is a conservation measure that took very little time in the span of things to make a very big difference. There are people alive that saw it go from 0 to 100, that have witnessed the changes to their forests, and it's remarkable. But here we'll show a photo of the Palila Discovery Trail and the area that is conserving. It's this Mamane forest. It's dry forest. It's a very remote ecosystem that is very, very different than the rest of the island. And that's where you see the Palila. On the Big Island, though, we've got a number of endemics. The first one being the Hawaii amakihi. It's very similar to the Oahu amakihi. It's stable, resistant to avian malaria, but that's probably the only good story facing honey creepers. We've got Iiwi, a very, very famous bird from the Hawaiian Islands. These are both my photos. They exist and are stable on the Big Island and Maui. You can still see them in good numbers in native habitat. They're rapidly in pitfall on Kauai, and they're extinct on Oahu entirely. This bird used to, in theory, jump between the islands, so it never speciated to one island specifically, and that was largely due to its sizable. It's a sizable bird, and it's due probably to its feeding habits. It's a nectivorous bird, but it's able to find nectar, whether it's drinking from mamane, which is the plant it's sitting on in this photo, or on the left, which is its more true to form a food source, a lobelia flower, many of which diversified on the islands as well in accordance with the honey creepers. There's a number of lobelia species that have gone extinct or are nearing extinction because there are no longer birds to drink from them and spread their nectar. Spread their pollen. And so I find it really fascinating, though, when you look at that flower on the left and you look at the bird's bill on the right, it's like a lock and key. They evolved together, and it makes sense. I like when nature makes sense. There's many times it doesn't. We also got the apapane, a bird actually stable across its range. It's another individual resistant to avian malaria. And they are actually on all 4 islands. They have not speciated within each island. The only place it's gone extinct is the small island of Molokai, which is off of Maui. But if we're talking the 4 major islands, you can still find apapane on them. And they actually will range fairly far downslope if needed to find food. And so that is one candidate for a bird you could see even closer to the sea level. But when we get into the details of the birds that Hakalau National Wildlife Refuge really is aiming to protect, the Hawaii akepa is one of them. It's this bright little orange bird. It's a very small bird. They're stable, but they're vulnerable, especially due to habitat degradation.
And I just want to mention briefly too, though, the bill on that bird slightly crosses, right?
Yes, exactly.
And so it has its name Loxops because it's one of the few birds that kind of has a slightly crossed bill. And crossbills are Loxia. They're not, super closely related. But I just wanted to at least let people know that it's one of the birds that has a slightly crossed bill called Loxops, is its genus, whereas red crossbill or white-winged crossbill is Loxia. So.
And what's really fascinating is it does exactly the same thing as crossbills, right? There's the buds of the Ohia lehua flowers, and before they open, this bird will be able to go in and it'll basically put its bill into the flower bud, and when it opens the bill, it's able to get at, I think it's drinking nectar, so perhaps the flower still is producing, but it's not in full bloom, or maybe it's getting into crevices of the flowers that other birds can't reach. But exactly like Matt said, that bill, you can't even really see it in this photo, which I find remarkable because I was so close to this bird.
It's very, very slightly crossed.
Very slight cross at the tip.
And that crossing is a lever, it uses as a lever to open things.
Right. And what's crazy too is that the bird on Kauai, known as the akekee, which is the individual that doesn't do well in captivity and is in free fall as well. It's the same version of this bird that lives on Kauai, but it forages identically. And I bet if you were to just take away all color for both, they would look identical.
Yeah.
Additionally, on Big Island, we've got the Hawaii creeper, also known as the alavi. They are stable but vulnerable. This bird creeps along the branches of trees and grabs insects through the lichen and the mosses. It found its niche. But the bird I really want to share with you tonight from the Big Island is the Akiapola owl, a daunting name, but an incredible bird. Stable but vulnerable. There's only about 1,900 left, and that was an estimate from 2009. So I'm not quite sure where they're at today. But what's remarkable about this bird is it's a very sizable bird. It's about probably 6 inches, and it's a beefy bird. I mean, I've seen them in the field. They're large. It's like a robin, right? It's got size and girth. And what's so cool about this thing is that bill that you see here functions in an incredibly unique manner that no one has ever found in any other bird in the world. What it does is the bottom part of its bill acts like a woodpecker chisel, and the top part of its bill acts like a probe so that it can pull grubs out of branches. So when you actually watch this bird forage in the trees, it'll grab a tree branch, it'll then open its bill and hit with the bottom part of its bill like a woodpecker and chisel a hole into the tree branch where it's found and detected a grub. Once the hole is deep enough, it will then move that bottom part out of the way, and it'll use the top part of its bill, probe into the hole, pull the bug out, and then eat it. And this is so remarkable. It's evolved only once ever that we can figure out. And this is actually a species that teaches its young how to eat up to a year after the young have hatched. So it's a passerine bird that teaches its young how to actually forage, because when the young come out of the egg and they need to wander the forest, and once they've fledged, they don't know how to eat with their bill. They've never been taught, and it's not something that they can teach themselves. So they'll follow the adults around the forest up to a year and learn how to actually forage for food alongside their parents, which is something that is very rarely seen in passerine birds entirely. And so this bird, I think, is one of my favorite birds in the world. It's got a crazy name. It doesn't necessarily, if you take away the bill, it's just a bright yellow bird, but it's just such a fascinating species. I can't get enough of them. Hakalau is also a conservation story. Friends of Hakalau Forest are basically reforested. The before and after images you see here are true. That forest was planted by volunteers over the last 40 plus years. And now we have a native Hawaiian forest at high elevations where all these birds are living. And that is where you go. If you go to the Big Island, most people go to Hakalau to see the native birds. And the story of how that all happened is crazy to me.
And you can find 6 of the honey creeper species in Hakalau.
Yeah. So you can get, the Big Island has the largest diversity left of honey creepers. And is also probably the most easily accessible place to see honey creepers, which is pretty neat.
Yeah, it's partly because of that high elevation aspect. That regeneration's come back. That's at a high elevation. A lot of us kind of consider it the last, refuge in some ways for these species. And it might even end up where some of these species end up getting translocated from other islands to Hakalau. So we're actually in the process. The Finch Research Network is going to give a little bit of money also to Hakalau. Jack Jeffrey, Nathan mentioned earlier, prolific photographer, conservationist, also guide over in Hawaii, has started kind of an endowment fund. Again, what this presentation really, in a lot of ways, why we're doing this is because people here across the mainland really don't know a lot about this crisis going on. So we're trying to raise awareness. Hopefully, it generates some funds that go into some of these efforts and some of these groups that are trying to do whatever they can to survive or preserve these last remaining species. The next slide, Dr. Hart, he has a lab, the Finch Research Network and Cornell Lab of Ornithology. We donated these autonomous recording units, ARUs, which you can kind of see a photo of or an illustration of one there in the middle. Dr. Hart has started this forest bird monitoring project in Hakalau. And like I said, Jeffrey has started this endowment, fund to try to continue to manage Hakalau into the future, because it is an area that is kind of fenced off to keep ungulates out, because there's other threats. The nice thing is high elevation, and it is considered potentially the last refuge for saving many of these species.
Absolutely. And we've worked with Dr. Hart, as Matt said. He's out of the University of Hawaii Hilo, and he's got a lab focused on Hawaiian honeycreepers and conservation as well. I want to be mindful of time, so I'm going to try to move fairly quickly here. But the biggest story on the Big Island right now that no one's talking about is this bird called the palila. There's 300 of them remaining, or even less. We're not even sure. And it's the only bird left of the grosbeak radiation, and the true seed-eating finches left on the Hawaiian Islands. It's over 8 inches long. Again, it's a huge bird. And what it does in this photo that I took, actually, that you can see, it's holding a seed pod from the mamane plant, and essentially it eats into the seed casing, and then gets the seed, the meat out, and is able to then subside off of that. And so they roam the native high elevation dry forests looking for mamane pods that they can eat. And then they'll sit sometimes in the top of a tree, sometimes in the center of the tree, and just sit and eat it like a corn cob. And it's so sad how they're in rapid decline. There is an organization through the government of Hawaii, actually, which is the Mauna Kea Forest Restoration Project. Here you can see a few of the threats facing palila. Fascinatingly, right, mosquitoes haven't even made it to the palila's range, and yet this bird is in free fall. Feral cats are the #1 threat that seem to be affecting them, although habitat degradation from ungulates due to hunters populating sheep and goats on these mountains is the other major cause. You can see some cat feces on the left with feathers of palila in it. And in the center, an image of a mamane tree that has been entirely denuded due to sheep grazing. And so one effort is really just to fence off areas, but the hunting pressure, the hunters and their pressure, I should say, on the Big Island is so serious that many conservation organizations don't even know what to do or how to handle this. So just as a quick recap, we've got 4 organizations helping on each of the islands. We don't have Oahu represented really because there's not really a crisis unfolding right now. But Maui and Kauai are the 2 islands that really have the biggest threats. Palila and its threat on the Big Island is right up there with them. Hakalau is working to not become another story of extinction, but rather become a safe haven for a lot of these birds. And so we encourage supporting them as well. But I really want to share what's kind of happening right now on the ground today. An organization known as Birds Not Mosquitoes is forming and has formed a multi-agency partnership that is working to protect Hawaiian honeycreepers from extinction. So what does that really mean? Well, you've got all these different organizations working very different paths through how to save these birds. And yet we really need a unified path forward. And so ABC, the American Bird Conservancy, really helped step up and fund initiatives on the ground for mosquito eradication efforts. And Birds Not Mosquitoes is the vessel that is happening through. And so here's where we're at. Right now on Maui, they are releasing mosquitoes that are incompatible with the mosquitoes on the island. Now that sort of sounds daunting, right? Let's explain what that really means. If you look at the graphic on the left, mosquitoes have a gut bacteria known as Wolbachia inside their stomachs. When they mate, a male and a female mate, if the bacterial genetic composition of Wolbachia is the same, which as of now on all the islands it is, then they can have eggs and larvae that then form pupa, and then you get more mosquitoes. If you introduce a male mosquito, which does not bite, to the islands that has bacteria, the Wolbachia bacteria that is different than the Wolbachia present on the islands in the mosquito population that lives there, when they mate, their eggs do not hatch, they become infertile, and eventually, if you inundate the system with enough males, the females will start to die, never having successfully mated and laying any eggs. And the goal is to then reduce mosquito volume across the island ecosystem. And so then the graphic on the right is really where we're trying to head, is you've got this mosquito line and anything below it dies and anything above it survives. We essentially want to take away the line and get rid of all the mosquitoes. And then you will have native honey creepers everywhere on the island because they're not restricted in some cases by anything other than mosquitoes and avian malaria. There's native habitat on Maui that goes all the way to the coast from where the birds are. They would use it all if they could. There's been studies that have seen these birds leave their native habitat, go down slope, never come back, even though there's perfect habitat down there. So we really just need to get these mosquitoes under control. And so this is happening right now.
A non-native mosquito.
Yeah, and it's non-native. Again,
Sorry, go ahead.
Point that out. It's non-native. So any mosquito eradication efforts, in my opinion and in Matt's opinion, should go full throttle. We should do whatever we can to eradicate them. There is no, in my opinion, restrictions that should be in place because these mosquitoes are already wreaking as much havoc as they possibly can. The matter can't get worse. And so one idea, if this doesn't work, that we've discussed is that perhaps we could form a GMO knockout mosquito that instead of this bacterial issue, when the GMO mosquito would mate, it would just kill the female. And then that way you don't even have to worry about eggs and reproduction. You can just try to eradicate them entirely. Many of these environments are so remote that any eradication efforts with regards to spraying or getting rid of pools of water that are the vernal pools for the mosquito eggs is futile because people can't even get to these places without helicopters in a lot of cases. Matt's now going to share with you a new project that's just come out.
So yeah, so I think maybe before I came on tonight, I mentioned Lillian Stokes and Lillian has written 35 guides with her husband Don. Don, unfortunately is in a memory care facility at this point. And we teamed up 2 years ago, a little over 2 years ago, and we have a new guide coming out. There surprisingly isn't really a comprehensive guide to finches in North America, or I should say United States and Canada. And we'll be, have this book. You actually can buy it right now, pre-order on Amazon. It'll go to print here in March. It'll be completely out of my hands, hopefully. We're very excited about this. It will cover the main breeding species of finches here in the United States and Canada, but we will have a section where we cover 8 vagrants and the 17 remaining honey creepers in condensed kind of species accounts. And then there'll be chapters on how to attract finches, kind of the wellness around, feeding finches for humans and bird watching. And then there's a chapter also on movements and eruptions, the history of that, and also research and conservation around the finches. So we're super excited about that. That's a Palila we have in the upper left there. Like Nathan said, it's kind of the last of the like what we've all kind of grown up envisioned as kind of a finch-looking species. So we added the Palila there, and there's a nice little yellow theme going on there with goldfinch, evening grosbeak, and Palila. But anyway, it's a pleasure talking to you. I think we're pretty close. Yeah. There's rainbow. There's always hope, I guess. Hopefully this Wolbachia thing takes hold and it works. Again, they're continuously raising funds. All these individual groups are raising funds to try to, get this off the ground. In fact, I don't think we mentioned, did you mention how they actually just started a pilot program releasing these mosquitoes back into the wild? It's a pilot project. So it's actually starting to happen now. What was the exact location, Nathan?
So they're releasing mosquitoes currently on Maui, I believe Waikamoe Preserve or very nearby it. And then they're going to be working right now to finish the assessment for Kauai. But just in respect to time, I think we've gone quite over. We're very sorry. There's lots to talk about for this subject. That was Waimea Canyon that I just showed you. It's on Kauai. You can go see that from a car if you need to. I took that photo standing 5 feet from my vehicle. So as Matt says, there is hope. Feel free to take a photo of this with your phone or something. We're happy to provide our contact information. But we'll leave you with this. If you have any questions, please let us know. And we really want to leave you with this slide. These are the organizations that we really support, and the Finch Research Network encourages donations to. The work Finch Research Network does can't happen without you, and the same goes for these organizations too. And we're acting today as best we can to be a vessel for them, given that their ability to reach the mainland is not as easy, and their time is very precious. But please head over to any of these 3 websites. All 3 of these organizations are doing groundbreaking work and backbreaking work to save these birds from extinction. And these are all birds that are, in theory, protected by the Endangered Species Act, and they seem to get very, very minimal funding. And so it comes from people like you that really make a difference. And so with that, I think we'll end
Any
our
questions?
presentation. And yeah, if there's any questions, I don't know if you guys can, I don't know if people can unmute themselves or if they want to put a question in the chat, but we're happy to answer any of the questions as best we can. And again, quite sorry for going over time, but thank you all for staying. It doesn't look like we've lost too many of you.
No, it doesn't.
Appreciative.
We're pretty enthusiastic about this, even though it's unfortunately a situation that needs as much help now as possible, because there is some hope here.
Absolutely. So I already see one question in the chat from Jan asking, could there be research on the apapane that is resistant to avian malaria? So I'll answer that. There has been research done. They do understand how it's gotten resistant. It was totally, I believe, like natural selection at work and a fluke. It just worked out in the apapane and the amakihi's favor that their genetics just happened to figure out a way around avian malaria. And unfortunately, it would be pretty remarkable to try to take genetic material from the apapane and put it in other species. So unfortunately, that's not something that's very feasible.
Yeah, it's not like they don't get the malaria. It's just it's not lethal to them.
Right.
Too. Yeah. I mean, they've been able to figure out how it, evolved to the point where it just is not lethal. So, how far are the islands apart? I think you mentioned that in the beginning.
I don't know if I actually shared how far apart they are, but they are very close, such that Evie used to fly between them for feeding. It's depends on if you're flying or swimming, but you can see each island from the other islands. I believe it's only, I want to say maybe 5 to 10 miles. I could do a quick Google search for that, but they are very proximal, and yet they're very remote, right? So if you're at the top of one of the islands in the native forest, you can't really see the next island. And these are very big islands. I mean, on Kauai, to do the one side to the other can take you over an hour of driving, because obviously you're not going through the middle. But even if you're able to do a fairly rapid pace, you still get stuck just trying to get around the island. And so these habitats are very isolated at this point, and birds are not able to just jump, unfortunately, in the way that we kind of could imagine. There is a reason they were able to diversify in very niche ways without overlap with each other.
Any other questions? I know it's getting late, but we can certainly take a couple more, but that's all right. If we totally understand, hopefully everybody, enjoyed it. It's an amazing adaptive radiation that took place there. And if Darwin had landed there, we'd be talking a lot more about, finches in Hawaii, not the tanagers in the Galapagos. Just let everybody know that.
Yes. So I see two more questions here. Unfortunately, I do not currently lead trips to Hawaii. I am only 27, so I have a feeling that could end up being in my future, perhaps. But as of right now, if you're ever interested, feel free to reach out to us, and we'd be happy to try to guide you as to where you could go to see some of these birds. Many instances I actually have found, I've contacted these organizations on the screen right now, and they can give you insight into how to access native habitat or if they're leading any trips. And then
Jack
Deb is
Jeffrey
asking,
still does trips on the island. He's a
yeah,
wonderful.
so Jack Jeffrey does lead trips on Big Island. And if you want to try to get into the Kauai or the Maui habitat, it can be a little harder, but there are still ways. And there are publicly accessible portions of each island.
I don't think the fires affected the species
They got
there, right?
very
There was
close.
what's
Very,
that?
very close.
Got close. Okay. Yeah.
So I believe they actually had to evacuate one of their breeding facilities on Maui, but the people were okay and the birds were okay. Unfortunately, native habitat is highly resilient. It's very tropical and lush, so it's very wet. Unfortunately, that is not what fire likes, which is a good thing. And yes, Nina's pointing out there's a bird research fundraising marathon on the Big Island every December. So if you're ever there for the holidays, would be great if you're able to contribute to that. But I think as of now, unless I see any more questions come in, Jeff, I think we're probably going to hand it back to you. I will stop my screen share. And we can probably...
Thank you guys so much. It is disheartening to see how rapidly we can lose species. But yet, if we put our minds to it and get the research out there, how quickly we can respond. I don't know. It's a double-edged sword, and I'm glad. I know Hawaiian birds are in trouble, but you never know the cause and reasons and what we can do about it. You put a photo of the last bird of its species and everybody's okay, like let's not let this happen to the next one. So
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, and there, like Nathan said, there's 100 of them in captivity that are doing, we believe are doing okay. Maybe there's some hope down the road. It's all hands on deck to try to save the last of these, and there is some legitimate hope here with the amount of money that has been raised. But it's an incredibly expensive effort when you have all these different, organizations. And this initiative that ABC put together with Birds Not Mosquitos to try to save these birds, just from the captive breeding program to even like the translocation of the alala to this Wolbachia project, which, mind you, I believe are, they're inoculated in California and then flown out there, right?
Yep. So I think Matt's Wi-Fi cut out just a bit there, but he was saying basically, these mosquitoes that they're releasing on the islands are bred and created in California, and then they have to fly them to the islands. They don't even have a program on the islands yet to make these mosquitoes. So with the Wolbachia incompatible strain. So a lot of money goes into this, a lot of time. And the only thing that hurts me most to know is that there's a snippet that I read about from 1890. The Queen on Oahu in Honolulu said to her advisors, "We are losing the Oahu o'o at a rapid rate due to avian malaria / mosquito bites," whatever she figured out. They knew it was happening. She was watching a species go extinct under her own eyes in 1890. And in 2024 is the first year that we have actually put serious money together to work to save these birds. It took over a century with known cause and effect issues facing these birds. And the federal government frankly did not pay much attention to this. And the Hawaiian Islands have been going through the ringer left, right, and center with regards to conservation issues. And the Hawaiian birds are just one version of that. But you can probably get the feeling that I'm very impassioned by this, and it's very aggravating that it took that long for us to realize the problem.
And there's been some unfortunately, some very vocal couple people, minorities that have, are just not interested in any kind of management of these, trying to save these species. And that's delayed things several times. So it's not like they haven't tried some efforts, but it's just, again, we kind of live in a society where sometimes the loudest person can sometimes kind of, get in the way of, some real conservation initiatives that need to be implemented now, not 5 years or 10 or 20 years from now.
Right. With that in mind, I think we'll all let you all get some rest.
Yeah, it's not, I really appreciate it. It's the first time we've given this presentation. We're we love, when he approached me, it was like, why wouldn't we support a project trying to do whatever we can to raise awareness for this conservation issue going on in Hawaii? But thank you, everybody.
Yes,
All right.
It was a
Well,
pleasure.
thank you.
And it's
I will
like
highly
really-
recommend you guys and the Finch Network to whoever I can. And good
Please
luck
do.
with that. And I encourage anybody that's here listening, donate, go over there, help out with a project any way you can. All right. Thanks much, guys.
Absolutely. Thank you, everybody.
Great. Thank you all. And briefly, I just put our emails in the chat should anybody feel the need to reach out. But I'm sure if you reach out to Jeff, you can contact us that way too.
Yeah. Good night.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Yep.
Good night.